You love me. You really love me.
Why aren't you screwing with my mind? Maybe I am just going crazy. Maybe I am just going...
Excuse me, gentlemen. Head detective.
Jim Carrey is widely labeled a comedian, but the constant in his career is disciplined physical craft scaled to big, kinetic set pieces, which is why he keeps showing up inside action frameworks even when the premise is built for laughs or families. Born in 1962 inches Newmarket, Ontario, he developed on Canadian club stages as an impressionist and stand-up, learning to communicate with silhouette, tempo changes, and clean, impact beats tools that read instantly on camera and plug directly into stunt grammar. Television made that language visible to mass audiences. On In Living Color in the early 1990s, he built characters that depended on precise body control and controlled chaos. Most famously, Fire Marshal Bill, a figure whose gags required the timing, falls, and attitude that stunt coordinators designed for action scenes. Even before the breakout year, feature work kept him near effects-driven and action-adjacent environments. Once Bitten 1985 and Earth Girls Are Easy 1988 put him inside makeup, wire, and VFX worlds that demand physical clarity. The Deadpool 1988 placed him briefly inside a hard-edged police thriller franchise, showing that his energy could sit in frames designed around pursuit and threat even when his role was small. The inflection point arrived in 1994, when 3 releases reordered studio assumptions about him. Ace Ventura: Pet Detective established a bankable lead persona carried by exaggerated movement and rapid tempo pivots. The Mask converted comic book material into superhero slapstick, surrounding him with chases, transformation gags, and choreographed mayhem that function like sanitized fight beats driven by dance timing. Dumb and Dumber added a third success in the same calendar year, confirming that his box office viability was not an outlier. The Mask is the clearest hinge toward the action star reading, because its set pieces use the same logic as a PG fight: a clear objective, a spatially legible obstacle, a run of impacts, and a winner decided by movement choices rather than gore. That template carried into a legacy franchise the following year. In Batman Forever 1995, as Edward Nygma, the Riddler, Carrey became a marquee comic book antagonist inside a world of gadgets, time detonations, vertical sets, and pursuit geometry. Even when he is not in a literal fight, the performance reads as action cinema. He poses in angular lines that silhouette cleanly, snaps between speeds to sell acceleration and recoil, and uses cane, props, and costume as extensions of motion. Everything is built to cut smoothly with chase and combat shots elsewhere in the film. Whatever the critical temperature around the movie, the effect on his profile was stable. He could anchor or oppose a hero in a large-scale action environment without changing his underlying method. The late 1990s and early 2000s kept the pattern visible while broadening tone. Liar Liar stages contortions and self-inflicted collisions as mini-stunts. They require the same mark, precision, and breakfall discipline that keeps actors safe in action sequences. The Truman Show, although a satire about surveillance and control, borrows chase language and hazard beats a boat in a manufactured storm, evasion through crowds that still rely on his ability to sell impact and recovery without chaos in the frame. How the Grinch Stole Christmas hides him under prosthetics and wardrobe and asks him to communicate intent and energy through exaggerated movement alone, a demand that parallels action work in creature suits and masks, where posture and timing must do the legibility work that faces normally handle. Bruce Almighty builds visual gags around cause and effect spectacles, again requiring precise marks and reaction timing that editors can cut on motion just like a light stunt. Even straightforward comedies in this period are engineered around impacts, chases, collapses, and escapes, because the performer at the center can sell them safely and convincingly. The result is a decade-plus sample in which studios repeatedly place Carrey in sequences that look, cut, and play like action, while the films themselves remain in comedic or family lanes. That is the foundation of the reluctant action star frame. The work fits the mechanics of action, but the branding and values avoid celebrating violent harm. The preference is choreography over carnage, velocity over lethality, and physical authorship over weapons. By the time the 2010 seconds arrive, the pattern is well established. He has a portfolio proving he can be staged in high-energy set pieces that rely on movement, clarity, falls, and object play at scale. He has worked inside comic book worlds as both a quasi-superhero and a franchise villain, and he has repeatedly sold sequences that editors cut the same way they cut fights. What he has largely avoided is the identity of a conventional gun and blood action lead. That gap is not a limitation of ability. It is the result of a method and a taste profile that push him toward physical storytelling and away from stylized violence. It sets up the conflict that will define the next phase. When comic book brutality and real-world events collide, he will draw a public line, and his action-adjacent lane will shift toward family franchises that can use his precision without the glorified harm that a traditional action persona often carries. Carrey's reluctant label became explicit in 2013. Around Kick-Ass 2, cast as Colonel Stars and Stripes, he filmed the role and completed principal photography, but months later, after the Sandy Hook school shooting, he publicly distanced himself from the movie's violent tone and declined to promote it. The statement was not a publicity play. It created measurable friction with standard studio marketing that expects lead actors to attend junkets and late-night appearances. He clarified that he respected colleagues and did not disown their work, but he could not personally support the level of on-screen brutality. The stance was consistent with a long pattern. His brand had always relied on precision movement, elastic framing, and choreographed cause and effect, not the fetishization of weapons or blood. The Kick-Ass 2 episode simply made the boundary visible. It also resolved a public ambiguity that had followed him since The Mask and Batman Forever. Was he evolving toward conventional hard R action or defining a different lane? By refusing to celebrate stylized carnage, he framed his screen energy as action-adjacent craft, not as an endorsement of violent spectacle. The industry reaction was mixed but pragmatic. Studios recognized the draw of his physical performance and comic intelligence, and there were other lanes where that skill set could be monetized without contradicting his stated values. The next high-visibility phase proved the point. Sonic the Hedgehog positioned him as Dr. Robotnik, a villain built on velocity, gadgetry, and exaggerated physical lines. The plotting uses chases, collisions, and set-piece rhythms familiar to action films, but the tone is calibrated for families. Carrey's contribution is the same disciplined physical grammar that once sold superhero slapstick and franchise villainy, now applied inside a PG framework. Crisp silhouettes, rapid speed shifts, prop-centered business, and impact beats that read instantly without graphic harm. The camera can cut on his motion as if it were a fight, and editors can build sequences around his acceleration, stops, and rebounds. But the audience receives the rush without gore. The first Sonic entry became a commercial proof of concept for that approach. The sequel reinforced it by scaling the set pieces and deepening Robotnik's cartoon villain menace while staying within a family rating. His performance leaned further into angular poses, cane-like gestures with tech objects, and punctuated footwork that sells momentum in wide shots. In both films, he anchors the kinetic spine of sequences that look like action, cut like action, and satisfy the audience's appetite for momentum, while keeping the moral line he drew in 2013. The result is a clean synthesis. He can headline the velocity and carry the comedy without crossing into celebration of realistic injury. This period also made his long-running craft choices legible to a new generation. For decades, he had trained the audience to understand story beats through posture, timing, and reaction, rather than dialogue alone. That training transfers directly to contemporary family blockbusters, where effects, animation assists, and live action must blend. He gives the VFX team readable frames to integrate with CG characters. He gives fight team equivalents clear impact cues that do not require blood. He gives directors cut points that preserve rhythm across shots. In practice, that means he can sell the logic of a pursuit, the logic of a hazard, and the logic of a confrontation using the same toolset he used in sketch comedy and early feature work. The difference is the framing. Instead of a nightclub crowd or a satirical newsroom, the frame is now a lab, a drone platform, a cliff edge, or a city street, and the adversary is a blue hedgehog with super speed rather than a straight man. The kinetic math is unchanged. This is why the reluctant action star tag is accurate but incomplete. He is not reluctant to deliver momentum. He is deliberate about the terms under which momentum is delivered. That distinction matters to parents who want energy without cruelty, and to studios that want a dependable PG franchise anchored by a recognizable face who can also drive publicity when aligned with the project's tone. It also preserves his credibility. The audience that followed him from stand-up and sketch sees continuity in method rather than a cynical brand pivot. He is still the performer who will hit marks precisely, sell a fall safely, and modulate speed for comedic effect. He is still the actor who can write a franchise's spectacle without ceding authorship of the character's movement language. Within this lane, even the public comments about pulling back from work read as measured rather than contradictory. When he has said he feels content or selective, the market and his collaborators have tended to respond by building spaces that match his preferences. Effects-driven, movement-driven, humor-forward, low on graphic harm. That supply meets the demand created by families and by viewers who want kinetic cinema without the queasy aftertaste of gleeful brutality. It also keeps his legacy coherent across mediums. The same body control that once powered Fire Marshal Bill's explosive misadventures now powers a scientist's dance of gadgets and pratfalls. The same timing that once sold a rubber face reaction now sells the snap of a drone, the jolt of a trap, or the whiplash of a comic reversal in mid-chase. In every case, the camera receives clean inputs for action syntax, and the audience receives momentum as delight rather than punishment. That is what the Kick-Ass 2 choice protected. It preserved the option to participate in large-scale motion and spectacle without aligning his name with violence he has publicly rejected. It clarified the brand for studios and viewers, and it explained why the roles that followed clustered around PG action, comic book color, and family-safe peril, where his authorship over movement can shine and his moral line can remain intact. Across 4 decades, Jim Carrey's screen language has stayed consistent while the containers around it changed, and that continuity explains how a performer globally identified with comedy kept being routed into action frameworks without adopting a conventional action star identity. The working parts are simple and repeatable: clear objectives, readable obstacles, acceleration and recoil time to camera, and a commitment to full-body authorship that editors can cut like choreography. Directors learned early that he delivers legible motion in wide shots and punchy transitions in close-ups, which means sequences built around pursuit, collision, and gadget play become plug-and-play whether the film is a comic book fantasy, a workplace farce, or a family adventure. That is why projects as different as The Mask, Batman Forever, Liar Liar, The Truman Show, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Bruce Almighty, and the Sonic films can all sustain chases, stunts, or effects-heavy beats anchored by the same performer without tonal confusion. The beats are engineered around the reliability of his movement grammar rather than around weapons or explicit harm. The 2013 Kick-Ass 2 decision did not subtract tools. It set boundaries on depiction, clarifying that the engine would be speed, silhouette, props, and controlled impact rather than celebratory brutality. After that line was drawn, the market response was to match him with properties that needed high-energy kinetics, inside ratings where families are present and where the spectacle benefits from a human actor who understands how to give VFX teams clean inputs. In practice, that looks like performances calibrated for motion capture-friendly arcs, crisp eye lines that let animators and compositors integrate digital elements, and prop business staged to read as cause and effect without gore. These are the same micro-skills that made sketch characters land on television and early features survive under prosthetics and makeup. The result is that action-adjacent material follows him rather than the other way around. Studio notes and set pieces bend toward readable geometry. Beats are designed to be sold by posture and tempo shifts, and confrontation resolves through movement choices that satisfy the audience's appetite for momentum while staying within an ethos he has articulated publicly. Inside this framework, even small resume details make sense as parts of a whole. Early exposure to effects work normalized harnesses, marks, and hitting reactions safely. Time in franchise spaces proved he could operate as either a quasi-superhero or a colorful antagonist without breaking scene logic. Repeated sequences of falls, slips, rebounds, and sudden pose holds trained viewers to accept him as the anchor of kinetic storytelling. The reluctant modifier therefore refers to content, not capacity. He can execute the mechanics of action and often does, but he refuses identification with styles that equate impact with injury for its own sake. That stance has career consequences and advantages. It excludes certain scripts but creates durable space in hybrid films where comedy, spectacle, and chase logic converge. And it gives marketers a coherent promise about what his presence means for tone. It also keeps the legacy legible to multiple generations. Audiences who met him through sketch recognize the same body control. Viewers who found him through comic book roles recognize the same silhouette discipline. Families who entered via Sonic recognize the same velocity without fear of graphic escalation. The continuity extends behind the camera, where departments can plan around dependable inputs. Stunt teams know he will hit marks and sell reactions. Editors know they can cut on motion. Sound teams know they will have clean punctuation points. Visual effects supervisors know the physical performance will give them anchor frames for CG elements. That production side trust is part of why he remains bankable in movement-driven films even when the surrounding trends shift. When franchises cycle or taste change, the underlying craft still functions because it is modular and medium agnostic. It works in live action, with practical sets, in effects-assisted worlds, in creature suits, and in broad villainy for family audiences. Taken together, these elements satisfy the title's claim with precision. The comedian became an action presence by perfecting a non-violent grammar of momentum. The industry kept inviting that grammar into action contexts because it cuts cleanly and sells globally, and he accepted those invitations selectively while refusing to align his name with on-screen violence he will not endorse. The outcome is a coherent, defensible identity, a performer whose films often move like action, whose set pieces are built like action, and whose values draw a visible line about how that motion is expressed, leaving a body of work that demonstrates capacity without capitulation, and a template for how physical comedy can power large-scale cinema without glorifying harm.